In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 NBA games happening on January 30th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 NBA games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Los Angeles Lakers versus Washington Wizards. The Los Angeles Lakers head to Capital One Arena on Friday to face the Washington Wizards in NBA action. It is a spot where recent form, fatigue, and injuries all quietly tug in different directions. The Lakers coming off a mini roller coaster. They beat the Bulls, then took a loss to the Cavaliers, and they have the Knicks on deck. Even with that stumble against Cleveland, they have still taken 4 of their last 6 games, which hints at a group generally trending in the right direction. Washington's story is a little messier on the surface. The Wizards just picked up wins over the Trail Blazers and the Bucks, and we'll see the Kings next. Those 2 wins pop a bit more when you remember they have dropped 38 of their last 52 games overall, so any small spark feels bigger than usual. Injuries hang over this matchup. The Lakers could be shorthanded, as they are monitoring Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, with both listed as questionable. On the other side, the Wizards have already ruled out Marvin Bagley III, Cam Whitmore, Trae Young, and Trey Johnson. The Lakers had been rolling before getting smacked by the Cavaliers in a blowout on Wednesday, which can rattle confidence for a night or two. The Wizards, who just went through a 9-game losing streak, suddenly look energized with 2 straight wins, and that kind of quick shift can matter more than people like to admit. From a spread angle, the Lakers still carry the talent edge and the benefit of extra rest, so it makes sense that they would be favored. That said, laying a big number with them here is not exactly comfortable, especially with Luka's status up in the air. The Wizards did play yesterday, yet they are competing, staying scrappy, and that has shown up at the window. They have covered in 5 of their last 6 games. They have also won their last 2 outright as underdogs, which suggests they have not checked out mentally. Washington is 4-1 against the spread in its last 5 games when catching at least 5 points, which is a pretty clear signal that larger spreads have not scared them off. Since December, the Lakers have lost outright 3 times when favored by at least 5 points, so their margin of error as big favorites has not exactly been pristine. As our first pick for this matchup, the Washington Wizards to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The Lakers are averaging 115.9 points per game on 49.5% shooting from the field, while allowing 116.5 points on 48.8% shooting. They are hitting 35.1% from 3 and 77.3% at the free throw line. Defensively, they are giving up 37.1% from deep and pulling in 41.3 rebounds per contest. The Wizards bring their own chaotic flavor. They average 112.3 points per game on 45.6% shooting and give up a hefty 122.3 points on 47.2% shooting. From long range, they sit at 35.3%, with a 77.6% mark at the line. They allow opponents to shoot 36.1% from 3 and collect 44.1 rebounds per game. Put those profiles together and you are looking at one team that scores efficiently but leaks points, and another that plays in high-scoring games because the defense gives way often. The Lakers have enough offensive punch to take advantage of that Washington defense, especially with their overall field goal percentage. At the same time, the Wizards' pace and willingness to trade shots can drag the total upward, even against a more talented opponent. Their recent results and the statistical gap between what they score and what they allow strongly suggest a game where both offenses find plenty of chances, and where defensive stops might come in short bursts rather than long stretches. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Toronto Raptors versus Orlando Magic. This matchup feels like the schedule playing a small prank, with one team that looks shinier on the sheet and another that has quietly been the more stubborn group on the floor lately. Toronto comes in at 29-20 overall, with a road mark of 16-9, and they are holding opponents to 112.1 points per game with a defense that sits in that trusted upper tier of the league. Orlando sits at 24-22, 13-8 at home, basically sitting in that pretty good but not terrifying range, scoring 115.4 and allowing 115.6, and moving at a pace just under 100 possessions that feels steady rather than frantic. Odds makers still lean toward Orlando as the home favorite, even while a lot of public chatter keeps circling back to Toronto's 4-game road heater and that top-shelf defense, and you can almost hear bettors talking themselves into the team that feels safer. That is the bait. The hook is what has actually been happening underneath the headline numbers. Orlando just snapped that 4-game skid with a 133-124 win in Miami, and it did not feel like a lucky break. It felt like a team deciding it was not ready to fade into the background. Paolo Banchero threw up a classic star line with 31 points and 12 boards. Anthony Black stepped in with 26, and Desmond Bane chipped in 23, which is the kind of scoring spread that tells you this group still has multiple ways to punch. Yeah, if you watched it, it had that "we are still here" energy, not a random January explosion that disappears the next night. Even the loss before that in Cleveland had that same vibe. Banchero dropped 37 and 10 in that one, and it felt more like Donovan Mitchell went crazy than Orlando losing its identity or its backbone. The Magic are still built around size, drivers who can live at the rim, and a steady parade to the free throw line, and now they get to bring that style back home against a Raptors team that was just smacked 119-92 by the Knicks. That New York game was the kind where you wake up sore for a couple of days, with Karl Anthony Towns and OG Anunoby forming a front line that leans on you on every cut, every rebound, every small piece of contact. On paper, the personnel tilt here nudges toward the home side. Orlando's core of Banchero, Bane, Wendell Carter Jr., and Jalen Suggs is intact, available, and carrying the load together, while Franz Wagner is still out with that high ankle issue and Colin Castleton is sidelined as a two-way big. So the Magic know who they are, they know who is playing, and the pecking order is pretty clear. Toronto, on the other hand, is still navigating life without Jakob Poeltl, who remains out with that lower back problem and is not walking through the door for this one. That keeps pushing them into those small ball, switch-heavy lineups that are annoying on the perimeter but give up size on the glass and around the rim. It is the classic trade-off. They can scramble and switch, but there is only so much you can do when a bigger team keeps hammering the paint and the foul line. R.J. Barrett is back in the mix but still easing his way toward a full load of minutes. Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes are carrying big usage, and Emmanuel quickly has turned into the pilot who has to solve half-court possessions against length possession after possession. That formula has actually worked out nicely in the big picture. Toronto is outscoring opponents by about 1.5 points a night, and the defense still sits in that top group, but you can see the weak spot. It leaves them exposed exactly where Orlando wants to live, right in the paint, forcing contact, piling up trips to the stripe. Even with that recent wobble, the Magic still profile as the slightly faster and more physical team, with a pace around 99.7 compared with Toronto's 98.3, and more size they can send out in waves. That matters late in games, especially when the legs start to go and every rebound feels like a mini coin flip. They just got that feel good again, result in Miami, and suddenly that size plus a bit of confidence gets to show up in their own building rather than on the road. There is also a memory hanging over this one. The Raptors stole the first meeting 107-106 back in December, climbing out of a 21-point hole in Orlando's own gym, and you do not have to be a sports psychologist to know that kind of collapse sticks in the back of a player's mind. Flip the script to a national audience and it starts to look a lot like a built-in revenge spot, even if nobody is saying that out loud at the podium. If you only look at against the spread history, it almost shouts Toronto at you. Orlando sits at 18-28 against the spread and 12-21 when they close as favorites, which is a brutal-looking ledger. Toronto, on the other hand, is 25-24 against the spread overall and 13-8 as an underdog in that similar range, which is the kind of split casual bettors love to point at. Honestly, that might be exactly why books keep hanging Orlando as the favorite here. They know the sheet looks ugly and they are not scared to invite Raptors tickets from anyone just glancing at the numbers. Pull it all together, Poeltl still on the shelf, Wagner's absence effectively canceled out by Toronto losing its interior anchor, Orlando's size and urgency lining up at home right after a "we are fine" win, and a market that seems a little more in love with Toronto's past covers than with the actual matchup, and you get one of those nights where perception and reality do not quite match. For betting purposes, this is still just a probability play, not a promise, even with current data on our side. As our first pick for this matchup, the Orlando Magic to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The Magic are putting up 115.4 and giving up 115.6. The Raptors are scoring 113.6 and allowing 112.1, so the combined scoring profiles land roughly 8 or 9 points above the number that odds makers are hanging. Opponents scoring against these two is still about 7 points over that same line, which is why a lot of model-based previews lean toward a higher scoring script. Here is the thing though, once you look at how these teams actually get to those totals, the picture changes a bit. Both groups play at a pretty deliberate pace. Toronto sits around 98.3 possessions and Orlando around 99.7, both tucked into that slower half of the league where games feel more like half-court chess than track meets. Neither one has that modern math cheat code of launching threes like crazy and hitting them at a premium clip. The Magic hit just 11.2 threes per night at 33.9%, which puts them near the bottom of the league in both volume and accuracy. Toronto is only a hair better with 11.5 made threes on 34.2%, still living in that bottom third range. So you are looking at two teams that do not run particularly fast and do not rely on the three-point avalanche. That is not exactly the blueprint for fireworks unless the whistle really takes over. Defensively, Toronto brings real teeth to the table. They are keeping opponents at 112.1 points per game on 46.2% shooting, with some of the stronger opponent field goal numbers around, which naturally pulls totals down if the game follows their preferred script. Orlando's defense is more middle of the pack on paper, but the style matters a lot here. This is a team built on length, disruption, and those little deflections that never show up in fantasy box scores. They average 8.3 steals and 5.2 blocks, so they are constantly turning drives into scrambles, which can slow the rhythm and turn possessions into grindy, late clock looks. Personnel again nudges the tempo story in a certain direction. Franz Wagner is still out with that high ankle sprain, removing one of Orlando's smoother secondary scores and one of their best glue guys on the perimeter. That pushes even more offensive responsibility onto Banchero and Bane in the half-court, which is great for their counting stats but usually means more deliberate possessions and fewer quick-hitting actions. On the Toronto side, Pueltel's continued absence has a sneaky double effect. They miss his offensive rebounding and easy finishes around the rim, even though their overall defense has held up without him. RJ Barrett is back but still creeping upward in minutes rather than being unleashed without restriction, so their half-court attack leans heavily on Barnes, Ingram, and quickly pick-and-roll actions rather than constant run and gun. That kind of approach tends to create a lot of possessions where both teams end up staring at the shot clock with 12 seconds left, trying to solve a set defense. The last time these two met, they played to a 107-106 finish, just 213 total points, and the whole thing felt more like a playoff rehearsal than a casual regular season outing. Toronto needed a big second-half comeback just to get there and still did not crack a huge number. Since that meeting, the Raptors have leaned even harder into their defensive identity, planting themselves firmly in that top tier by defensive rating and opponent efficiency. Orlando, meanwhile, just shattered its losing streak with that 133-124 shootout in Miami, which feels more like the exception than the rule when you consider their pace, their shooting profile, and their usual preference for physical, choppy games. There is also the human side of this that bettors sometimes underestimate. Toronto is coming off that bruising 119-92 loss to the Knicks, a game that felt heavy both emotionally and physically. Orlando is coming off a high-energy, emotionally charged comeback win in Miami, and now they have to throttle down and play a conference opponent that they already have history with. That combination often leads to a slightly slower rhythm, more half-court possessions, and a lot of tired legs on jumpers. To be fair, that part is speculative. It is reading the situation, not reading a spreadsheet. Put together the slower-than-average pace, the below-average three-point offenses, a high-level Raptors defense, and key scoring pieces either missing like Wagner and Pueltel or not fully ramped like Barrett, and the path to a game that settles in the low 200s and 10s becomes very real. The season-long averages might hint at a higher scoring night, and some models will keep flashing that way, but the matchup, style, and current injury context lean in the opposite direction. Any total wager still lives firmly in the land of probability, but the puzzle pieces on the board tilt toward a quieter scoreboard rather than a fireworks show. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Sacramento Kings versus Boston Celtics. The Sacramento Kings roll into TD Garden on a Friday night feeling every bit of the weight that comes with a 7-game losing streak, and that kind of stretch has a way of testing how much belief a locker room has left. They just took close losses to the 76ers and the Knicks, and with the Wizards looming right after this stop in Boston, this trip feels less like a road swing and more like a stress test on their season and their patience. When a team has dropped that many in a row, it is rarely only about talent. It becomes about how they respond to runs, how quickly they fold after a bad whistle, how willing they are to keep defending when the shots are not falling. Sacramento has been stuck in that frustrating space where they are competitive enough to hang around, like they were in Philadelphia, but not sharp enough to close the deal. And that is exactly the kind of profile that can quietly cash tickets as a big underdog even while the headlines scream another loss. On the other side, the Boston Celtics are in a very different emotional neighborhood, even if things are not quite perfect for them either. They took care of business against the Trail Blazers, slipped up against the Hawks, and now step into this one having won 21 of their last 31 games, which is the kind of sustained stretch that keeps a fan base confident even after the occasional flat night. With the Bucks waiting next, it is also one of those classic sandwich spots where a superior team has to fight the urge to glance ahead on the calendar, especially with the home crowd expecting a comfortable night against a struggling visitor. Roster-wise, the roles are pretty clear going in, and not necessarily in a good way for either side. Sacramento is still missing Malik Monk, Keegan Murray, and Russell Westbrook, which strips away a lot of their punch and forces everyone else to lean a little further into responsibilities they might not be built to carry every single night. Boston is dealing with its own star problem, with Jason Tatum still out and Jaylen Brown officially tagged as doubtful, which turns what should be a straightforward matchup into something that leans more on system, depth, and coaching than on pure star power. These teams have already seen each other once this season, and that meeting finished with the Celtics walking away from Sacramento with a 120-106 win. A scoreline that looks comfortable on paper but, as always, hides all the strange swings that happen during 48 minutes of basketball. Now you flip the venue, throw the Kings onto the second night of a back-to-back, and tack on the reality that the Celtics are being asked to cover a hefty number despite missing their alpha scorer and possibly their secondary one too, and suddenly this does not feel like the automatic blowout that a quick glance at the standings might suggest. Sacramento just pushed a good 76ers team to the wire as a sizable underdog on the road, and they have quietly put together a track record of hanging around when the market pushes their line into double-digit territory, covering 4 of their last 6 in that role and even turning a couple of those into outright wins, which is the kind of thing bettors remember even if casual fans do not. Boston, for its part, has not exactly been a covering machine lately, failing to get the job done against the number in 4 straight games, which hints that the gap between how people think of this team and how they are actually performing night to night might be a little wider than the logo and the record suggest. As our first pick for this matchup, the Sacramento Kings to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The scoring profile for Sacramento this season looks like a team that is constantly playing uphill on the scoreboard, and you can feel that in their games even before you look at a single number. They are averaging 110.5 points per game on 46.7% shooting, which is serviceable, but they are giving up 120.6 points on 49.2% shooting, and that gap is exactly why so many of their nights feel like they are trying to bail water out of a leaking boat. From deep they sit at 35%, steady but not terrifying, and at the line they hover around 76.5%, which is fine until you realize how much margin they do not have when their defense is allowing opponents to hit 35.4% from outside and pulling down 41 rebounds per game against them. Boston's statistical picture tilts in a much more comfortable direction, which is part of why totals on their games can be tricky, especially when the board already knows they can score. They are putting up around 116.4 points a night on 47% shooting while allowing about 110.1 points on 44.8%, creating a much healthier cushion between what they score and what they give up. They knock down threes at roughly 36.7%, hit almost 80% of their free throws, and control the glass with about 44.9 rebounds per game, which usually gives them multiple chances to find a rhythm even on nights when the first quarter feels a little clunky. Here is the thing though, raw numbers only tell part of the story when you start subtracting stars from the equation, and that is where this matchup gets interesting for a total. The Kings are already battling uphill on defense, and now they are without Monk, Murray, and Westbrook, all of whom tilt games toward more pace and more offensive pressure when they are on the floor, so their absence can actually drag things into a choppier, more half-court style where possessions feel longer and role players are a little more careful with the ball. On Boston's side, missing Tatum and potentially Brown changes everything about how they attack because so many of their big scoring nights come from those two bending defenses, and when you replace that with more committee offense you usually see more passes, more read and react sets, and just a touch less of that one guy explodes for 40 and breaks the total by himself energy. Add in the scheduling spot, with Sacramento on the second leg of a back-to-back and walking into a loud building against a physical defense, and it is not hard to picture stretches where both teams go cold for a few minutes at a time, especially if the refs let a little contact go and the game leans more physical than free-flowing. We know Boston can defend when locked in. We know Sacramento gives up points but does not always have the juice to push the tempo themselves, and when you combine those traits with key offensive names in street clothes, the path where this turns into more of a grind than a track meet is very easy to imagine. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Portland Trail Blazers versus New York Knicks. Madison Square Garden on a Friday night already has a certain buzz, and the Portland Trail Blazers walking in there as underdogs adds that little extra bit of edge to the whole thing. They come in off losses to the Wizards and the Celtics, with the Cavs waiting for them next, and yet, big picture, they have still won 11 of their last 17 games, which quietly says this group is more resilient than people might think if they only check the last week of scores. The Knicks are on the opposite side of the momentum swing right now. They just handled the Kings, took care of the Raptors, and have the Lakers on deck, riding a 4-game winning streak that feels like the start of another one of those classic New York surges where the crowd starts dreaming a little bit bigger with every home game. It is one of those stretches where everything looks cleaner, the ball moves, and roles feel settled. Portland, though, is not exactly rolling in at full strength. They are still without Chris Murray, Scoot Henderson, Matisse Thybulle, and Blake Wesley, and now they have Robert Williams III and Denny Avdija both sitting in that uncomfortable questionable zone that keeps everyone guessing about rotations until closer to tip. The Knicks have their own small cloud hanging overhead, keeping tabs on Josh Hart and Miles McBride as questionable, which matters because both guys bring that glue energy and defensive pressure that this team leans on a lot more than the box scores admit. The Blazers were on a really nice run before the current 3-game skid hit. They did not exactly inspire confidence in that loss to the struggling Wizards, and that kind of game can spook bettors, even when the larger sample still paints them as a team that competes most nights. On the other side, the Knicks look like they are heating up again, stacking 4 wins in a row and even making light work of a hot Raptors squad in their last outing, which is the sort of performance that pushes lines a little higher than usual when they come back home. New York will be favored here in their own building, and history has been kind to them in this matchup lately. They have not dropped a game to Portland since November 2022, and that run includes a 9-point win on the road just a couple of weeks ago, so there is a recent reminder that their style holds up just fine against this particular opponent. On paper, it sounds like the perfect spot for the favorite. Here is where it gets interesting, though. This number is thick for a Trail Blazers team that fights, hangs around, and has actually been a profitable 27-21 against the spread this season. Since November 30th, Portland is 10-4 against the spread when catching 5 or more points, and 6 of those covers turned into outright wins, which is a wild little detail that shows how often they punch above their perceived weight. The Knicks also have those 2 key rotation guys listed as questionable, and that is not nothing when you are being asked to win by margin. Honestly, the Trail Blazers just have that pesky vibe, the kind of team that does not go away and forces you to actually close the door instead of assuming it will slam shut on its own. As our first pick for this matchup, the Portland Trail Blazers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The scoring profile here has a very specific feel when you start to look at what both teams actually put on the board over time, rather than remembering only the occasional explosion. Portland is averaging 115.6 points on 44.8% shooting and allowing 117.5 points on 47% shooting, which puts them in that tricky space where they can score enough to be entertaining but often find themselves chasing because their defense leaks a bit more than their offense can consistently cover. From 3, they sit at 33.7%, and at the free throw line they are at 77.3%, while they are grabbing 46.8 rebounds per game and giving up 35.1% shooting from deep. which all combines into a style that is more scrappy and effort-based than clean and efficient. The Knicks, in contrast, bring a more polished statistical shape to the table. They average 117.5 points on 47% shooting and allow 112.7 points on 46.2% shooting, so there is a clear cushion between what they score and what they give up. They hit 37.7% from beyond the arc and 79.1% from the free throw line, while surrendering 36.7% from deep and pulling down 46.3 rebounds per game, which usually helps keep games under control when they dictate the rhythm. Put those two profiles side by side and the picture that emerges is not just raw offense, but the way the game flow can actually slow a bit, especially in a building like Madison Square Garden where possessions sometimes feel a little heavier and every miss gets a reaction. Portland scores, but often has to work hard for those points, and New York has enough defensive structure to push them into late clock situations and contested jumpers rather than easy runouts. On the other end, the Knicks can absolutely fill it up, but they are also capable of leaning on their defense and rebounding, especially if some of their rotation players are less than 100% and the emphasis shifts toward control instead of pace. It would not be surprising to see stretches where both teams lean into half-court sets, test each other physically, and trade more empty trips than the headline scoring averages would suggest. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Memphis Grizzlies versus New Orleans Pelicans. The Memphis Grizzlies and the New Orleans Pelicans square off at the Smoothie King Center on Friday night, and this one feels less like a classic Western showdown and more like a therapy session between two teams that have taken a few too many punches lately. Both sides are stumbling into this game with more questions than answers, but the paths they took to get here are very different, and that matters if you are trying to figure out who is actually more trustworthy for a full 48 minutes. Memphis just lost to the Rockets and the Hornets, and that Hornets game really summed up where they are right now. They can flash good stretches, even shoot the ball well for long chunks, then suddenly fade when it is time to actually close a game. They have dropped 10 of their last 14 and 7 of their last 9, so this is not a blip. It is a pattern that keeps repeating no matter who is on the floor or how they start. When you pull Ja Morant, Zach Edey, Scottie Pippen Jr., and Santi Aldama out of the mix, you are not just losing talent, you are yanking out structure, creation, size, and a lot of what made their identity work in the first place. On top of that, the Morant situation is not just about an elbow injury on the report, it is this cloud of trade chatter hanging over everything they do. Every time his name pops up in another rumor, it is a reminder that the franchise is sitting at a crossroads, and players feel that, no matter how many times everyone says the right things to the media. You watch this group and it sometimes feels like a team that plays hard in spurts, but knows deep down this season is more survival mode than a real push for something big. New Orleans comes in on its own kind of skid, but the story is slightly different. They beat the Spurs, lost to the Thunder, and now see the 76ers up next. So this game sits right in the middle of a rough little stretch in the schedule. They have dropped 15 of their last 19, which sounds brutal, but that makes their recent win at Memphis stand out even more. They went into FedEx Forum as clear underdogs, took a punch, and still walked out with a 133-127 win, fueled by big nights from Sadiq Bey, Trey Murphy III, and Zion Williamson. That game showed that even with their record, when the Pelicans get rolling, they can absolutely punish a team that is wobbling mentally and physically. The health picture pushes things even further toward New Orleans. Memphis is missing Morant, Aldama, Edey, and Pippen Jr., and even Ty Jerome is sitting there as a question mark, so the rotation keeps getting squeezed and reshuffled. The Pelicans, on the other hand, are basically looking at one big absence with DeJounte Murray ruled out, but the core of what they want to do is still intact, and that is a huge luxury in a season like this. It is not that New Orleans is suddenly some model of stability, but compared to what Memphis is juggling, it genuinely feels like the Pelicans are the more settled side right now. Honestly, it is still a little strange to see New Orleans wearing the favorite tag given how ugly their overall record looks, but that has as much to do with where the Grizzlies are emotionally as it does with anything the Pelicans are doing. Memphis has the look of a team counting the days until the break, hoping to reset, heal up, and maybe get clarity on what the future with Morant looks like. The Pelicans, messy as they are, at least showed last week that they can attack this specific matchup, lean on Williamson and Murphy III to carry the offense, and let their relative health edge grind down a short-handed opponent. Jaren Jackson Jr. can absolutely give them problems again, but if he is once more asked to carry too much of the load without enough help, this sets up as another spot where Memphis fights for a while, then fades late while New Orleans leans into the crowd, the paint pressure, and that, we need this one, urgency. As our first pick for this matchup, the New Orleans Pelicans to win and cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now, switching over to the total, this matchup gets a lot more interesting when you stop staring at the records and actually look at how these two teams are playing possession by possession. You have two groups that can score in bursts, but neither one feels like a smooth, free-flowing offense right now, especially with the injuries and trade noise baked into the equation. Memphis is averaging 114.8 points per game on 45.4% shooting, which sounds solid enough on paper, but that raw number hides how uneven their offense can be without Morant running the show. They can still hit from deep at a respectable 34.7% clip, and they cash 80% at the free throw line, yet you see long stretches where the ball sticks, the spacing looks cramped, and they are living on tough jumpers rather than easy paint touches. They also grab around 46 rebounds a night, which helps limit the damage when the shots are not falling, but it also means they are often dragging the game into more half-court sequences instead of playing track meet basketball. On the other side, New Orleans is sitting at 114.4 points per game on an even cleaner 46% from the field. But the real story is how many points they are leaking on the other end, a hefty 121.2 on 48.3% shooting allowed. They knock down about 33.7% from 3 and 78.5% at the line, so the shooting profile is decent, not deadly. This is not some 5-out flamethrower attack that is raining threes from the logo. A lot of what they do well runs through the paint, through Williamson's pressure at the rim and Murphy's ability to stretch the floor just enough to keep defenders honest. Here is the thing, both teams' defensive numbers look leaky at first glance, with Memphis allowing 116.3 points on 46.2% shooting and New Orleans giving up those 121.2 points. But when you factor in the current injury situation and the way these rosters are being used, this does not automatically scream wild, end-to-end scoring fest. The Grizzlies' guard rotation without Morant and Pippen Jr. naturally slows down, possessions get more deliberate, and they lean more on half-court sets. The Pelicans, missing Murray, lose a key downhill guard who can speed the game up, so you are again looking at more structured trips, more usage through Williamson inside, and Murphy working in defined actions rather than constant helter-skelter pace. You also have to remember that both teams are coming in with some fatigue, some frustration, and a lot of film on each other after that recent 133-127 meeting in Memphis. Coaches usually respond to a game like that by tightening the screws, trimming rotations a bit, and hammering home defensive details, especially around transition defense and three-point contests. Combine that with the missing playmaking on each side, and it sets up for a game where scoring runs still pop up, but the overall flow leans more toward grind than fireworks. Put it all together, the scoring averages hint at offense, the injuries pull the pace and efficiency back, and the familiarity after that high-scoring first meeting nudges both coaching staffs toward a more controlled script where every possession feels a little heavier. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.